Welcome back to our podcast. This is episode 7, I believe. Last week we started in on the structures of music, and we talked about melody and harmony as being two of the main structures, building off the ideas that we talked about in the first couple weeks around rhythm and pitch, and then about the blocks of those frequency and duration before that. So, with no further ado, let's jump into texture. Texture is the term used to refer to the blend of the various sounds and melodic lines occurring simultaneously in music. The word is adopted from textiles, where it refers to the weave of the various threads, loose or tight, even or mixed. A cloth, such as tweed, for instance, leaves the different threads clearly visible. In fine silk, or percale, the weave is so tight and smooth that the constituent threads are almost impossible to detect. Thinking again of the pitch or time graph we saw last week, we can see that it is possible to plot more than one pitch for every time slot. Melody exists in the horizontal dimension, texture in the vertical dimension. For the moment, we leave the lower dots below the melody unconnected. The first texture we'll look at is monophony. This is the term for the simplest texture, a single unaccompanied melody. Gregorian chant, or singing in the shower, or row, row, row your boat before the second person comes in, are all great examples of monophony. Mono, meaning one, phonic, meaning sound. Simple as this texture is, some very beautiful and sophisticated monophonic music has been composed, just as artists have done wonderful things with line drawings. Heterophony. A special kind of monophonic texture, not much used in European classical tradition, but more prominent elsewhere, is called heterophony. This is a texture in which subtly different versions of a single melody are presented simultaneously. If you stay in music and continue to study, we will come across some of those in the coming years, but they do exist, especially outside of European classical traditions. Homophony. When there is only one melody of real interest and it's combined with other sounds, the texture is called homophonic. So homo meaning same, and phonic once again meaning sound. So this is different from monophony, where there's only one, to where they're singing at the same time but different pitches. A harmonized melody is an example of homophonic texture. For example, one person singing the tune "Row, row, row your boat" while playing chords on a guitar. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. We might indicate a chord on the pitch time graph by a vertical box enclosing the dots. The sum of these boxes represents the harmony. Homophony can be thought of as a tight, smooth texture, like silk among the textiles. Polyphony. When two or more melodies are played or sung simultaneously, the texture is described as polyphonic. Poly meaning many, phonic meaning sound. In polyphony, the melodies are felt to be independent and of approximately equal interest. The whole is more than the sum of the parts, however. The way the melodies play off against one another makes for the possibility of greater richness and interest than if they were played singly. In the textile analogy, polyphony would be compared to a rough texture where the strands are visible, such as tweed. It is also important to recognize that polyphonic music automatically has harmony, for at every moment in time, on every beat, the multiple horizontal melodies create vertical chords. Those chords make harmony. A word often used for polyphonic texture is contrapuntal, which comes from the word counterpoint, which is the technique of writing two or more melodies that fit together. Strictly speaking, refers to the texture, and counterpoint to the technique of producing that texture. One writes counterpoint to produce polyphony, but in the practice, the two terms are used interchangeably. Imitation. In fact, polyphonic texture, like so many other musical elements, cannot be categorized with any precision. It is impossible to distinguish all the kinds of polyphony found in Western music of the enormously intricate kinds of non-Western musics. One useful and important distinction, however, is between imitative polyphony and non-imitative polyphony. Imitative polyphony results when the various lines sounding together use the same or fairly similar melodies, with one coming in shortly after another. The simplest example of imitative polyphony is a round, such as Row, Row, Row Your Boat or Frere Jacques. The richest kind is a fugue, which we'll come across in the future. When people sing a round, by singing the same tune at staggered time intervals, the result is imitative polyphony. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Your boat merrily, 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 your boat merrily, merrily, merrily. Non-imitative polyphony occurs when the melodies are essentially different from one another. An example that many will know is the typical texture of a New Orleans jazz band, with the trumpeter playing the main tune, flanked top and bottom by the clarinet and the trombone playing exhilarating melodies on their own. Here is a made-up example of non-imitative counterpoint with a new melody added to the tune of Row, Row, Row Your Boat. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 merrily. Life is but a dream. Let's listen to a few examples. A short section from the Overture to the Bartered Bride provides clear examples of several textures. We won't start at the beginning, we'll start halfway through. The first thing you'll hear is the theme on this occasion has no accompaniment. This is monophony, a single unaccompanied melody played, however, by numerous instruments at the same time. After about 12 seconds, the theme, many times repeated, and the rustling sounds come thick and fast, running into one another and overlapping. This is imitative polyphony. Then, about 50 seconds later or so, when the polka arrives, we have a loud tune with accompaniment. This is homophony. So we start off with monophony, into imitative polyphony, and finally to homophony. For an example of non-imitative polyphony, we'll hear the third movement of Johann Sebastian Bach's Cantata No. 4, Christ lag in Todsbanden. A simple tune is sung, one phrase at a time, by a tenor, while faster, different music is played by the violins. Jesus Christus, Gottes Sohn. Or play the climactic section, the last movement of Berlioz's Symphonie Fantastique, after about the 8-minute mark. Berlioz combines a slow-moving theme in the brass with a fast-moving theme in the rest of the orchestra, both very loud. And with that, we come to an end on episode 7. We covered texture in this episode, talking about monophony, heterophony, homophony, and polyphony, and heard a number of examples to go along with those. Next week will be a longer episode talking about tonality and modality to wrap up what we have for the structures of music, and then we will start to look at musical form and musical style. Have a great week, and we'll see you next week.